Good morning and welcome to Arup and to 80 Charlotte Street, a fully electric building designed by us, of course, to be net zero in operation. And as you would expect, powered by renewable energy. Had to get that out there first. I'm Paula Walsh, the Managing Director for Arup in the UK, Middle East, India and Africa. And I am a structural engineer. Also, I delude myself on a daily basis by background. And I have to say that as an engineer, I am enjoying, I hesitate to use the word, but I'm enjoying the challenge and opportunity that decarbonisation is presenting to us as engineers, even if the root cause, obviously, is less than ideal. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome you all here today, and we are delighted to be able to host this discussion around climate action by and for the built environment sector. Before we go any further, I have to do a small health and safety message. We're not expecting a fire alarm today. So if the alarm does go off, it is for real. Please do follow the exits. They're all clearly marked, and there will be people here who will escort you from the building. Our muster point is in Fitzroy Square, which is just out there, turn right, keep going. Beautiful square, not a bad place to muster, if I'm honest. So back to this morning. Like many organisations here, Arup is working really hard to take the carbon out of our operations to achieve net zero. And we rely on Science-Based Technical Institute, or TSBI to its friends, I'm advised, to examine and validate our net zero plans and obviously to monitor and check and review our progress in delivering them. Our investment in decarbonisation includes the electrification of our workplaces where we can. I mentioned, obviously, this building is fully electric and was designed to be electric, maybe even before people had got to grips with that being the way forward. But our glorious global headquarters next door, Cross Road, the blue building, often known as, was designed to be gas-powered, which was obviously what we were all doing at the time it was designed and constructed. But that is now changing. We're very proud. We are currently removing our gas boilers from that building and installing air source heat pumps on the roof. And there was a beautiful picture on LinkedIn from Roy James, one of our directors, which was a skip full of all the pipe work that was previously carrying gas being obviously taken away to be recycled this week. And this is absolutely part of our global plan to implement our net zero aspirations. We also think about the big picture as an organisation and our ability to accelerate climate change action through the work we do. Every year, our technical experts are working on around about 1,000 buildings, property-related projects across the built environment in more than 100 nations and across all continents. So we recognise that it's the advice that we give to clients, the work we do with clients can absolutely have that big impact on climate at a larger scale. My colleague Chris Pountney, who's on the panel this morning, will be talking about how our knowledge and our contributions, we've brought that to SBTi's building sector guidance, so that we can continue to influence at a bigger level. So we feel as an organisation, we are at the heart of helping to shape the built environment globally, worldwide. There is nothing we want more than a property sector that is capable of delivering decarbonised and resilient buildings that offer people safe and healthy spaces to be. I'll now hand over to SBTi's new CEO, David Kennedy, and he will share a bit more about SBTi and this morning's conversation. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Paula. What a great introduction, and wonderful to be here in a zero carbon building as well. And it's a great setup, isn't it, for a very good discussion that we will have shortly. So I'm going to say a few words and offer a few reflections on my first 90 days in the job. And I've just about done 90 days as CEO of SBTi. So I would start by saying, what a great organization. That's why I've joined SBTi. It has far surpassed the expectations I think anyone had for it. And for those of you who don't know, we work now with 10,000 companies globally. We are very present with corporates and financial institutions in this country. So UK is a leader. We have many members of our community in this country, but we are really a global organization, and I think that's where our power is. So those 10,000 companies are 1,000 in the US. We've got about 5,000 in the UK and Europe, and then 4,000 in Asia, which is a big and growing market for us as well. In terms of real estate, we are working with about 300 real estate companies that have validated SBTi targets, which is great, but we are keen to grow that. And I'll come back to, if you're not with us already, what you can do, which is join us and do that ASAP, get on that journey. So great organization today, far surpassed expectations. I've joined because I think we can have huge impact in the future. And I think one of my team put it very well to me recently, we are sitting on a gold mine. So when you're working with 10,000 companies and setting the standard across all of the different sectors, including real estate, you can make a real difference. And that is what we will do as we go forward. So that is why I've joined SBTi. What I hear, and I've talked with many people inside and outside the organization over the last few weeks, and I get a consistent pair of messages actually from business, and I'll talk about both of them. So the first one is we need SBTi. It's the gold standard. It sets the standard, and without SBTi, it's a bit of the Wild West. And somebody was saying to me this morning, we get all sorts of different requests through the supply chain for data and its variations on a theme, and there isn't a standard for it. And if you haven't got a standard, you can't have a coherent approach that is consistent and sufficiently ambitious. So that's what they say. We need SBTi. We want SBTi to succeed, is the second message I get, and we want to work with you towards that success. And the third is we need you to evolve your approach, and particularly as we move from the first phase, which was off the back of Paris and optimistic and setting stretch targets, into what now has to be all about action and implementation. So I'll come back to that in a second. But also business says the business case remains strong, and that's really important. So you get different vibes at Climate Action Week. And there's a bit of a negative story that, we've got the politics in the US and there's a real battle on, and maybe we're losing the battle, and companies are pulling back and, not following through on the commitments they've made and whatever. That is not what I hear, actually. And I've talked to many companies across geographies, across sectors, including real estate companies. So the message I get is, well, the business case remains strong. We continue to plan, we continue to act. We've maybe got a different comms approach, and particularly in the States, it doesn't pay you at the moment to be out there telling a very powerful story about net zero. But this is not a near-term game. This is a medium-term strategy, and beyond the medium term, companies carry on. Now, why do they carry on? Because we're in a world of increasing climate risk. It's crystallizing. It's very visible. It's hard to imagine that as we get more and more droughts, floods, wildfires, that we will not collectively act to manage that risk. So that's the first thing. Second is we've got an international agreement which, without the US, still covers the vast majority of global emissions. Let's not overstate the role of the US, let's not understate it, but we've got that international agreement. It's got momentum, and people can see that is driving action right across the world. And then the third thing is we look at individual countries, we look at this country, we have got increasing incentives, policy frameworks that are being developed, whether it's for real estate, whether it's for other sectors relevant to real estate. So if you're moving to electric buildings, you want a decarbonised grid, and that's what we are moving very quickly towards here in the UK. So a lot of reasons why companies are planning for a carbon-constrained world. I'd summarise it as this, that companies say, we've done TCFD, most companies. We face transition risk. We want to manage it. We need to reduce our carbon footprint. That is how we are going to be competitive now and in the future. And if we think, what does it mean for buildings? Paula, you summarised it. Basically, you want to do energy efficiency improvement on existing buildings. You want to move, typically, to electric sources of heat. Heat pumps are now very efficient. Coefficients of performance have increased very significantly over the last 5, 10 and 15 years. And for new buildings, the focus needs to be on, can you source lower carbon materials? And I say lower rather than low because we're not at the stage where we've got truly low carbon cement. We're not at the stage where we've got truly low carbon steel, for example. We will get to that point in the next 5, 10 and 15 years as we get hydrogen based production in those kind of areas, as we get carbon capture and storage. In the meantime, there are things that are lower carbon, and that should be the focus. So let's come back to the first point, I should say, which is, what I'm hearing from business is you need to evolve your model. And just to give you a sense of what we're doing there. So one, we are working in partnership. This is what we will do as we go forward. We work in partnership with businesses who want to be on the net zero transition. So we are there to support you on your journey. We're not there to chastise you, to set targets that you could never meet. And I'm not saying we've done that in the past, by the way, but we are there to work in partnership with you. So that's a really important thing I would like you to take away. Second, we will always be science-based. That's our superpower. And we need to be science-based because if we are going to help companies navigate transition risk and act to manage that and stay competitive in the future, you've got to root that in the science. The science frames the ambition of what all companies should be doing in a carbon-constrained world. So we'll be science-based. But increasingly, we're going to focus on action and implementation. Action, we've got a building standard already, which embodies the key actions that I've just said. So it's energy efficiency improvement, it's moving to electric sources of heating. Those are the two key things. And then we've gone through sourcing for new buildings, lower carbon supply. So actually in buildings is a bit of a forerunner. We have a building standard. Many of you will know this. It's a bit of a forerunner of the direction of travel as we go forward because it includes actions. And it says, for example, very specifically, in signing up to the building standard, you commit that you will no longer in your buildings invest in new gas boilers, for example, beyond 2030. And that is sensible in a carbon constrained world. There's no modelling where you continue to get in a carbon constrained world investment in gas boilers beyond 2030. We just state that. You'll see in our standards as we go forward that there will be more statements around that. And actually, the no investment in gas boilers, we're going to ask a question, is there a way of bringing that more generally into our approach? Because, the big challenge actually in net zero, we've made good inroads to energy efficiency improvement generally. We've made good inroads to renewables. There's more to do. Heat decarbonisation is going to be the big challenge for the next 10 and 15 years. So that will be a big focus for SBTi as well. Second thing is implementation, and a question. At the moment we say, you've signed up for your target, and I'm caricaturing this to make a point, but we'll see you in 5 years. Come back and report your progress and sign up for your next stage of targets. I want to see what we can do in that interim period. So you've signed up with us. How can we help you as we go forward? And the obvious question actually, again, let's make it specific to buildings. So the obvious question is, how can we support you to electrify when there's a whole load of dependencies for electrification? So one of the dependencies, if you're a big building, is, can you get an increased load from the grid? And that's quite hard at the moment. So those grid connections and getting prioritized is maybe something we could help with. I don't quite know the mechanisms for that, but that's one thing we'd look at. The second is the economics of gas versus electricity depend on the relative prices of gas and electricity. And at the moment, it's not very favorable. Electricity here and in most countries is very expensive and gas is very cheap, and that needs to change. And is there a role for us in exposing that through our building standard, through working with our community of real estate companies and getting change in the various countries to support that heat decarbonisation? So question there. And then I'm nearly finishing, don't worry. I don't want to take up the time of the panel. They've got much more interesting things to say than I have. So the last thing is we will be a listening, engaging organisation. We will be working with all of our partners in a joined up way to make sure that we are consistent and that you're not being asked by different organisations to do different things. Now, we've got our corporate net zero standard. We are consulting on that. All I would say is the corporate net zero standard doesn't replace the building standard. It fits together with it. So that is our overarching framework, and then the building standard is the deep dive that is relevant for real estate. So those two things fit together very well. And the last thing I would say is, if you are a company who have been preparing to submit a target for validation, And you think, well, shall I wait? Because they're consulting on this corporate net zero standard version 2, and that's coming in next year. Maybe that's the best thing to do, pause for a few months and see what happens. I think my answer is no. I don't think my answer. My answer is very clearly no. Please go ahead and submit your targets for validation. There is a great building standard. We'll evolve that over time, but it's better that you've got something in place now, a target that focuses your company, and you can start to act and you can start to move towards that lower carbon footprint, which will serve you well in the future. If you've already got a target, I would say stay the course. So there's a lot of companies thinking, am I going to stick with SBTi? You know, what if in 2030 I can't meet the target I've signed up to? Are they going to shame me? And the answer is no. We're not going to shame you. We're a partner. If you've been doing things, if you've made progress, if you don't quite meet your target, we want to continue to engage and to work with you. So if you're with us, stay the course. If you're not with us, please sign up now and get on that journey together. We can change buildings. We can change the whole corporate space. We can be on that net zero. This is about economy primarily, and if it wasn't, things would not happen. It's about a business case. It's about competitiveness. It's about managing transition risk. And it has great benefits for the world as well in managing something that's existential for all of us and our families and our friends and whatever. So let's work together. And with that, I am going to hand to Amanda. Amanda being our buildings lead. I should introduce you properly. Thank you. Have a good discussion.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate it. So, just as I've started, I hope you all looked at the Slido link before we started, and I'm giving you a heads up that I might test you at some point as we move forward. So make sure your phones are to hand. But welcome. So it's really great to see so many people here and some faces that I know from my pre-SBTi days, and also a lot of new faces. So I'm Amanda Skeldon, and I joined SBTi nearly 3 months ago, around the same sort of time as David. And it's a new role for SBTi as our first sector engagement lead. And I'm focusing, obviously, on buildings. So my role is focused on driving impact. So how do we raise awareness and understanding of science-based targets across the building sector globally? How do we engage with partners and companies and membership organizations to build a really strong collaborative narrative that can drive rapid decarbonisation across the built environment? So today, I am going to talk you through the application of science-based targets to the building sector, specifically applying the building criteria that David mentioned, some of the business drivers, the opportunities and actionable benefits that are seen from setting science-based targets across the sector. And afterwards, I'm going to hand over to our brilliant panel who are going to share their own thoughts and experiences of how science-based targets have helped them drive action and leadership. So, Science-Based Targets Initiative, David's given a great overview, but we're a global body. We enable businesses to set ambitious climate reduction targets in line with the latest climate science. We've been through a big evolution recently, and today we're an independent registered charity that develops standards, tools, and guidance that allows companies and financial institutions to set greenhouse gas reduction targets in line with what is needed to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change by limiting warming to 1.5 degrees C and reaching net zero by 2050 at the very latest. We also have a wholly owned subsidiary commercial arm, SBTi Services, and that's the one that provides the validation services to companies setting targets. So we have a really broad reach, and David touched on this, but in January this year, we saw a major milestone with 10,000 businesses having set or actively committed to setting science-based targets. And that's really appropriate because this year we're coming up to our 10-year anniversary. And earlier this month, we reached another major milestone with over 8,000 companies having validated targets. And that was an increase of just around 1,000 in just 4 months, which shows you that there's still a real ambition and a real progress by the business sector to set targets. And these adoption levels are reflected across the real estate sector. We've seen nearly 300 real estate companies globally setting targets. We've seen a steady increase in net zero validations year on year, and we're less than halfway through 2025. We can see there's a really good progress to this year. And since we launched our buildings criteria in August last year, we've got 13 companies who've applied that to set their targets, and there are another 9 in the pipeline. So what are science-based targets? I could throw this back to you, but I won't. So our corporate net zero standard lays out the full framework. Net zero targets are made up of 4 key elements. The first is the 1.5 degrees C aligned near-term target, a target with a time frame of 5 to 10 years. The second is a long-term target, a target to reduce emissions to a residual level by 2050 or sooner. While there is some sector differentiation, and we'll touch on that for the building sector, in most cases, this will be a 90% reduction or more. And the third element on the screen here is optional, but we highly recommend rapid and deep cuts to value chain emissions. They need to be the priority for companies. Businesses are encouraged to embark on these as voluntary additional action. It's what we call beyond value chain mitigation. And the fourth and final part is that when you've achieved the long-term target and cut emissions by more than 90%, you need to commit to neutralising residual emissions through permanent removals from the atmosphere. So, moving on from the corporate net zero standard, we have the building sector criteria. The net zero standard provides the overarching framework for science-based target setting, but we know that some sectors, as David referenced as well, require more tailored guidance due to their own unique emissions pathways and also due to their own emissions profiles. So the built environment, we all know, is a large global emitter. We have both operational emissions and we have embodied emissions in the construction of buildings. Between 2020 and 2050, the predictions are that the global floor area is expected to grow by 75%, with 80% in developing economies. So this expansion puts real pressure on the sector's carbon budget and underscores the need to scale up retrofits, efficiency gains, and extend asset lifespans. At the same time, our buildings are exposed to increasing physical and transition risks, which means alignment with credible science-based decarbonisation pathways is more urgent than ever. So in response, SBTi developed the building criteria in close consultation with sector experts, some of whom are here today, and applying science-based targets through credible pathways like CRREM, and using sector-specific intensity metrics. So the criteria provide tailored science-based guidance to help stakeholders such as yourselves in the built environment to set 1.5 degrees C aligned emissions reduction targets. Developed in collaboration with CRREM, these criteria include granular decarbonisation pathways for in-use emissions across different building types and geographies, as well as global pathways for embodied emissions in new construction. The criteria are designed for a wide range of stakeholders, offering practical guidance on emissions accounting, reporting, and target setting. And in addition, we have the SBTi Buildings Target Setting tool, which enables companies to develop robust targets using these new decarbonisation pathways. So there are a set of criteria to look at to decide whether or not you should be applying the buildings criteria to your target setting. The first, C1, is if in-use operational emissions from owned and or managed buildings are at least 20% of your total scopes 1, 2, and 3, category 1 to 14 emissions in the chosen base year, you'll need to follow the building criteria and set a target on in-use operational emissions. The second criteria is looking at upfront embodied emissions. So if these, for new buildings, exceed 20% of total scopes 1, 2, and 3, categories 1 to 14 emissions, in any of the past 3 years, companies will need to set targets on upfront embodied emissions of new buildings. And if a company meets both thresholds, you'll need to set 2 targets, one for in-use emissions and another for upfront embodied emissions. And the third criteria is one that's really critical. It's the intended users. The building sector has a really diverse value chain involving many players with different roles and responsibilities in managing emissions. And we know that for some, the corporate net zero standard is the most appropriate framework. But for a clear section of the audience as well, the building specific pathway is a more suitable framework. So the following businesses are defined as the intended users for the criteria: developers, owners, both occupiers and lessors, property managers, and financial institutions with building-related emissions in categories 1 to 14. So these users are required to use the building criteria when they meet thresholds for category 1 and category 2 that we just mentioned, those 20% thresholds. Other companies in the value chain are encouraged to set targets using the cross-sector methods, but the insights from the building criteria can help consider building-specific emissions and targets for those. Now, as David mentioned as well, if you've already set targets, you do not need to come back and set building criteria targets if you hit these. Until you're reviewing your targets at a standard 5-year review point or at any other point that would trigger that, then you can consider how you apply the buildings criteria. So, under the criteria, we expect that the built environment companies can adopt a more focused and transparent approach to their climate targets. You need to set separate science-based targets for building-related emissions, and these need to be clearly distinguished from other operational emissions. You need to take a whole building approach. It's required for in-use operational emissions, which means that targets must reflect all energy consumed within the building, not just landlord-controlled areas. For developers or building owners requiring new assets, the criteria also require targets for upfront embodied emissions, as we mentioned. And in line with decarbonisation urgency, companies must commit to installing no new fossil-based equipment within 5 years of target submission, or by 2030, whichever comes first. And finally, companies are expected to disclose their buildings-related emissions using the location-based accounting method to ensure transparency and comparability across different regions and energy systems. So, one of the key challenges facing all companies is the vast array of reporting, accreditations, target-setting frameworks, and all of these different areas you're expected to respond to. So one of the key parts of my role is that I'm planning to clearly articulate where the buildings criteria fits into the wider ecosystem. How does it connect and align with the plethora of reporting, accreditation, and benchmarking frameworks that exist? There are quite a few ways to approach this, and this is my first stab at visualizing it, so I hope it's useful, but also really welcome any thoughts and feedbacks. So we know that the landscape is crowded and that the building sector, perhaps more so than some, we have regional benchmarks, we have asset level standards, we have portfolio level standards. And within my team, I have colleagues who are specifically focused on the interoperability of our standards. And this is something that we want to see as key to translating ambition, to setting standards, to setting action and driving this forward. So I've just got a couple more points before I hand over to our panel. And what I really want to focus on and what our panel are going to focus on is what are some of the benefits for businesses of setting targets. Aligning with science-based targets can reduce financial risk. It can position portfolios for compliance with fast evolving regulations like MEES, embodied carbon reporting, and EU-aligned disclosure frameworks. So some of the key points here are some of the benefits that we see and that we see talking to our companies. So protecting asset value. JLL found that green certified office assets command rental premiums of 7 to 11.5% and have a lower risk of value erosion, which protects them against some of the new emerging regulations and tightening standards. Accessing capital and incentives. In South Africa, REITs implementing green buildings through science-based targets unlock sustainability-linked loans and green bonds, resulting in higher capital values and rental premiums. And Mitsubishi Estate in Japan used their science-based targets to inform issuing sustainability-linked bonds, tying finance cost to its climate performance. Another benefit is reducing transition risk. The Design Council predicts that UK's 65% of office assets are predicted to be stranded by 2030 unless they're decarbonised. Aligning with science-based targets helps avoid fines, carbon taxes, and compliance penalties. Boston Properties in the US incorporated green lease clauses across 50% of leases and reduced their lease asset emissions intensity by 39% since 2008, which proactively manages their transition risk. Stakeholder and investor expectation. Again, research shows that 50% of UK investors cite occupier ESG requirements, such as science-based targets, as major drivers in property investment decisions. And also at the bottom here, they drive innovation and digital transformation. We're all aware how critical this is. Green certified assets typically achieve 98 to 99% occupancy rates. And this drives uptake of smart building technologies and new services. Setting science-based targets also enables the sector to drive leadership, aligning corporate action with environmental and social benefits, and really supporting a just transition. So cutting operational and embodied emissions. So after setting science-based targets, we have great examples of where people have reduced their emissions. Multiplex achieved a 93% reduction in scope 1 and 2 emissions in 1 year, driven by electrification, renewable energy, and strategic capital investment across their portfolio. Setting targets can support urban and national net zero goals. So it enables companies to align their emissions with national NDCs, regional climate goals, and make sure that their efforts are a meaningful part of broader climate action. They can also help strengthen health and equity outcomes. If targets are set as part of a broader sustainability strategy, we can see significant co-benefits. One example is Landsec, whose commitment to net zero emissions by 2040 sat alongside a much wider sustainability plan to enhance green spaces and promote health and well-being. Boosting brand and tenant appeal, critical for many people in the building sector. Again, as I mentioned, 11% rental premium, 98 to 99% occupancy. And across 20 global office markets, only 34% of future demand of low-carbon workspace is likely to be met in recent research. So there's a significant supply shortfall of buildings that meet demand from tenants. And the final point on here is credibility and transparency, creating a level playing field for real estate building companies to set comparable targets and demonstrate validated approach towards net zero. We know it's hard, and we know that's a lot out there for companies to think about, and it can seem daunting. But as we said, to date, we've got 13 companies who've applied those building criteria. They're companies and financial institutions. They're coming from both sides of the organization. And many more real estate companies have set targets using the corporate net zero standard. So we're really proud of these, and great to see some of you here today. So before I hand over, what next for the building sector? As I said, I've been here 2.5 months, and this was a really, really short overview of the buildings criteria and my ambition and the SBTi's ambition for engaging the sector. There is a lot more in the pipeline. We're really excited that we're launching our new training and certification program this year, which will provide practitioners of every level with the knowledge and skills needed to apply the SBTi standards to their own company and to advise others. And later this year, we're hoping to create a building-specific module for that, which is really exciting. As David mentioned, we launched our consultation on version 2 of the corporate net zero standard, and our team are now buried deep in the thousands of responses to look at how we analyze that data. And as the new iteration of the corporate net zero standard evolves, our technical team will concurrently be focusing on how to ensure that our sector-specific guidance, such as the buildings criteria, remain interoperable with the new standard. I'm really aware that there's many questions and so much interest in engaging with the SBTi on this. And there's so much knowledge on science-based targets, evolving technological, political and social landscape around the decarbonisation of buildings, just in this room and definitely in your wider networks. So I'm really keen to create a collaborative space to share and learn. So over the coming months, I really want to work with our partners, with organisations that bring companies together that are leading the way in sustainability and decarbonisation. So if you think you have a group of organisations who would benefit from learning more about the SBTi, or who can share input on how we can take this forward and align and collaborate more broadly, please do reach out to me. First thing I would say is if you want deep understanding, though, into our criteria and you have questions on that, on our website, there is a brilliant FAQ document. And seriously, if you've got some really technical questions, I would definitely recommend going there first. But we're really happy to engage more beyond that. So in 1 minute, I'm going to hand over to our Chief Impact Officer, Tracy, and our brilliant panel. The Slido is the place where you can drop questions, and I have it on my phone. So even if I can't make it work on here, I can access questions. So if you have any questions for the panel, please drop them into the Slido as you go, and we hope to be able to put those to them at the end. I have now got it working. So this is our last one. Let's see if we can make this work, and I can end on a technological high. What would be, or what was, your primary thought or consideration when approaching or reviewing setting science-based targets for your organisation? And we should have a wonderful cloud of thoughts, challenges, opportunities, as I welcome our panel to the stage. Thank you so much. Credibility. What have we got coming up? I'm loving this, and I'm loving that it works. Combination. Tracy, I'll give you a quick signal when we're getting to the point to make sure that we've got Q&As coming up at the end. I'm just going to give this 1 more minute because I love it, and I don't know if you can see behind you guys. I'm sorry, you're going to have to turn your head. But there's some really brilliant comments coming in from across the room. So yes, let me now hand over to Tracy and the panel. Thank you.
It's not such a big space, but
The desk ones should pick you up as well, whichever's easier.
okay. Can everyone hear me? We have a on. It looks like it's on.
But let me do this for you. That'll pick you
Hello?
up.
No. Okay.
That one should.
Right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Tracy Wyman. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at the SBTi, and I am joined here by a brilliant panel that I'm going to introduce momentarily. Before I do, I just want to make a shout out to the wonderful Loudis Foundation, who have supported the building sector work that we do and also brought us Amanda. So thanks to Loudis. And okay, let's see, introducing my panel. You guys, we really are very lucky to have these people with us today. We have so much knowledge and experience in the built environment. I start with Roland. Roland Hunziker, who is the Director of Built Environment and a member of the Extended Leadership Team group at WBCSD. Roland joined WBCSD in 2007. He leads the Built Environment Pathway. We'll be working very closely together in the coming months and years, and is engaging and supporting companies to drive market transformation to a net zero, circular, and nature positive built environment. It's not just about carbon, right? Roland will probably tell us that. Through a common vision, science-based target setting, and collaboration along the value chain. I think collaboration is probably a theme that's going to come up. Roland serves as the co-chair of the steering committee of the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, Global ABC, which you're all familiar with, whose mission is to drive the transformation to a zero emissions, efficient, and resilient built environment. Thanks for joining us, Roland. I am also joined by Giel Lindhorst, who is the climate lead at ING. You'll tell us about ING setting their science-based targets. Giel drives the bank's science-based target strategy, including sectoral decarbonization pathways for high-emitting sectors such as buildings. He previously led the development of the sectoral decarbonization approach, SDA, at Ecofis, now widely used in the SBTi framework, and helped shape the first SBT guidance for financial institutions, for which we're really grateful. Giel brings over 2 decades of experience in climate strategy, energy systems, and sustainable finance. Thanks for joining us, Giel. I go on to Chris Poutney, who is with Arup, our host. Thanks so much for hosting us. Chris is the Associate Director for Climate and Sustainability at Arup and leads climate mitigation and GHG advisory projects in Arup's London climate team. Drawing on his technical background in buildings and energy systems, Chris specializes in data-driven approaches to decarbonization challenges in the built environment. I hope we hear about data and what we can do with it. Over 20 years, Chris has developed detailed evidence bases and action plans for districts and master plans for local authorities and national governments and for corporates in a range of sectors. Chris was a member of the SBTi's Expert Advisory Group on Buildings, and he is the Arup Global Skills Leader for Decarbonization and Sustainability, developing technical excellence across the firm. Thanks for joining us, Chris. And then finally, we have Ariane Ephraim. Ariane is the Senior Sustainability Manager at Workspace Group, where she drives the development and delivery of the company's net zero strategy. Most recently, she led the resetting of Workgroup's science-based targets following the latest SBTi guidance. She also brings extensive hands-on experience in implementing operational efficiency measures, running occupant engagement campaigns, and supporting sustainable construction practices. So we have in our panel from on-the-ground, hands-on action, right up to sector coordination and everything in between. We're going to have a very interesting discussion. We will have time for questions at the end, so I know you guys are industry experts. Think about your questions, and we'll come to those. Now, we're going to start with, I have questions for each of my panelists that are specific to you and your experience. I'm going to start with Giel. Giel, ING have applied the buildings criteria when setting your science-based targets. What was the business case that motivated you to do that, and what was your experience?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, our journey on target setting started when we set the ambition to play a leading role in financing the transition to a low carbon economy. And the buildings portfolio at ING as a global systemic important bank is a part of those targets. We have a large global portfolio in commercial real estate. So we already started applying a target, a couple of years ago. And when CRREM started their work, we also applied the CRREM pathways to set our targets, and we were really excited to see that SBTi also teamed up with CRREM to integrate those pathways into SBTi. So we wanted to have our targets validated to get recognition for our leadership, but also wanted to have this in place to also have a good conversation with our clients. Because We want also our clients to apply science-based targets, and having a global framework in place is really key for us to speak the same language with our clients.
Thank you. Moving on to Ariane. Ariane, you literally just had your net zero targets validated. Congratulations. Can you briefly talk us through why you decided to set science-based targets and how you found the process?
If that's okay, I'll give a quick introduction to Workspace Group to kind of like set the scene. So we're a flexible office space provider with approximately 70 buildings in office buildings in London and the southeast. So just a little bit of history. It's not the first time the business has set science-based targets. We actually were a signatory to the Better Buildings Partnership Climate Change Commitment back in 2019. And on the back of that, we set up our first science-based targets that were underpinning our net zero carbon pathway that we published in 2020. And those science-based targets were mostly looking at Scope 1 and embodied carbon. Fast forward 5 years to end of last year, and we had acquired a company with quite a fair amount of increased floor area across the portfolio and a lot of additional buildings in 2022. And also SBTi had published several versions of the corporate net zero criteria and the awaited building guidance, sectoral guidance. So it was perfect timing for us at end of last year to revise our science-based targets, given the portfolio change and given our 5-year milestone anyway. So that's for the context. For us, I think the validation process, I'll come on to that, but yes, kudos to the SBTi team, very, very smooth. But in terms of like what it brought, what the benefits associated with setting science-based targets, I think what David Kennedy said in his introduction is very true. It is the Wild West when we think about environmental targets, people accusing each other of greenwashing. I feel like the science-based targets is one of the very efficient ways of kind of demonstrating credibility, robustness, completeness of your carbon accounting and the net zero targets that you set for your business. So that's one thing. We thought we had a pretty comprehensive carbon reporting process, but the SBTi, the science-based target setting process allowed us to find a few ones that we didn't think of, like, for example, refrigerants and F-gas for like tenant-managed refrigerants, which ended up not being material, but it's helpful to kind of identify those areas and be as complete as possible. I was amazed by the kind of like, to support that credibility argument, the SBTi team really looking into whether our electricity was from renewable sources or not, which I've never had from any auditors I've ever worked with verifying our data. They really asked this question and asked for a lot of proof on whether our electricity was definitely renewably sourced. So that was quite impressive. And yes, so in terms of also just being able to identify our most material areas, our most carbon intensive business areas, and being able to set action plans. I think that's the most important thing, because science-based target, you set them, it's great. It's a great signal to the market, to your investors, to your occupiers, and your peers, but it's also about what next. And I think this exercise really helped us design action plans that we translated, as I guess the role of any in-house sustainability team, translate this into how do we work with our colleagues, like what are the actual next steps to get us to that short-term target and to that long-term target. So we identified key levers of action, which I think are going to really kind of like are going to be the framework for what we're doing next. And on the process itself, sorry, that was long. On the process itself, well, as with any new guidance, a couple of teething problems, but really minor, I would say. We were incredibly well supported by our consultants as well. So shout out to the Green Gauge team, Amrita and Akshita that I can't see. They're amazing. And your validation team, who were always very responsive anytime we couldn't find exactly what that particular field meant. They were very responsive and they were able to clear out any doubts we had, any questions we had throughout the process. So and in terms of engaging with our internal team, also incredibly powerful. I guess from, sometimes C-suite level, we're setting net zero targets, but they were often asking, but is this really tailored to our business, to the building sector? So now it's very easily a yes answer to that question. So that was really helpful in terms of senior engagement and engaging with investors as well. So I hope more people adopt this guidance.
Thanks, Ariane. We'll pass the good feedback on to the validation team. I want to move on to Chris. Arup have been involved in the expert advisory group for the building's criteria, as well as setting their own ambitious science-based target. Where do you see the value of science-based targets for your business and the companies you work with?
Thank you, Tracy. I mean, much of what we've already said applies to us too. So signaling to the market that we want to really kind of live out what we say we believe in, and sustainability is core to everything that we're doing here, and so that shows it well. Just to pick up on, I suppose, one or two other ideas. For us, we are seeing clients making sort of supply chain requirements for having validated targets, and so that's important for us in work winning and in positioning ourselves in the marketplace. But also, I'd say for our members, so Arup is employee owned, and the people who work here feel passionately about the ethos of the company. So I think particularly for early careers colleagues and graduates coming in, to sort of see that we are trying to really be robust and transparent about our ambitions, I think is important. So certainly the broad range of benefits that we've already discussed, but some of those concerning our people and our projects as well.
Thanks. I'm moving on to Roland. So if we look back at the big picture of decarbonization of the building sector, we heard from Amanda how important the built environment is to decarbonizing the world, and how we're going to continue to see, increased floor space over the next decades. Science-based targets is just one piece of the puzzle. So how do you see that fitting in to the puzzle? How important is it? And where do we sit in that bigger picture?
Well, thank you, and especially thank you for having me. I think it's a very important piece of the puzzle, to be honest. Just going back to David's introductory remarks, I think absolutely business, if it didn't exist, they would want a science-based targets initiative to come to the front. So yes, we want it. We want it to succeed, because it is important that we have that credibility and something really that is transparent and can get everybody behind. And yes, it needs to evolve. The devil is in the detail. And as WBCSD, we are also involved in the greenhouse gas protocol update together with WRI. So actually, some of the questions that SBTi needs to solve can only be solved together with also the greenhouse gas protocol. So we're not going into those details now. There are many of them. But maybe coming back to the building sector, I think this is very welcome, because it's such a fragmented space. We have so many companies coming together when it comes to building projects, and they're all one-on-one interactions, and we need to have that system focus. And so where science-based targets comes in is we really lack two things, and one is an agreement on where we need to go. There is still too many different standards out there, different ways of doing things. So we need to agree on where we need to go. And then yes, the business case is often still an issue. But I think once we have that journey, then I think we can also work, and that's again something where we as WBCSD come in. We want to also help all our members, who are 250 companies. They all are global occupiers as well, in actually then driving that business case. So the two really go hand in hand. And to us, when we look at market transformation, science-based targets can play that role. And as Giel said, you work with others. CREM have already done some work. You did the first go at the embodied carbon pathway. Now, it's incomplete, of course, it's a global pathway. Some companies say, well, it's impossible where we are, but it was a first step, and that can be refined. So also this invitation from David that we want to work together, definitely from our side, we are very open to work with you in evolving that so that it's sector relevant and can be implemented. And maybe the most important thing, it really drives the momentum because the built space needs that demand side signal. Companies up in the value chain, they're ready. They are working on their solutions. We're talking about cement decarbonization. Construction firms have their targets, etc. But ultimately, if the occupiers don't know what to require, then the sector cannot deliver. So you are a very important piece of the puzzle.
Thank you. Amazing. Okay, so I want to ask all of my panelists to go a little bit deeper on the business case, and in particular, how setting science-based targets have, well, my business panelists, sorry, Roland, we'll come back to you. How science-based targets have helped drive action, or how you expect them to be able to help you drive action in your company. Let's start with Giel.
Then let me focus on our engagement with our clients. So we have set a target on our commercial real estate lending book, which is a book of about 30 billion globally. And it's spread over several regions. So the value we got from, of course, CREM and the SBTi is that we can apply the new tool, and we have applied the new tool also to get the pathways for each of these building types for each region. Of course, that's critical to us because the transition differs and the starting point differs per building type, per region. So that value is clearly there from the CREM and the SBTi collaboration. But talking to our clients on that we lend to is key to us, because we need them to drive change. And that starts with us with collecting transition plans. So we collect transition plans from our clients, and we have a good conversation with them if they have a poor transition plan, because we want to see progress from our clients on their transition. And that already captures questions like, do you measure the emissions? What's part of your footprint? But also, what are your actions and your targets? And there's also where SBTi comes in. So we want to have that deep conversation with our clients on target setting. And that's where we feel there's a strong value to have indeed this global framework in place that can be applied globally to our client base.
So does it mean that as a financial institution, it's helpful for you to have science-based targets to be able to influence your...
Yeah, of course. If you want to be a credible partner, if you want to be a credible financial partner, a bank, and you want to have a good conversation with your clients about setting science-based targets, you have to do it yourself as well. So we have set targets. Of course, for us, it's not only a target on our commercial real estate book. We have also targets on cement and steel and oil and gas and power. So it's across the portfolio, but commercial real estate is an important part of that whole book.
Great. Yeah. Let me move on to Ariane. Driving action.
Yes. So I think much like you were saying, it's about having a credible net zero carbon pathway. A net zero carbon pathway is great. It's even better if it's underpinned by science-based targets. Even better if it's with the latest guidance. Even better if it's the building criteria if you're a real estate business. And I think I'll echo what Christopher was saying before about. I think you were saying about the employees of Arup really caring about this. For us, there is we have witnessing something very similar, especially in the younger generation, but also our customers. So our customers are mostly startups and SMEs. We've got the highest concentration of B Corp businesses in London, which itself is the highest concentration of B Corp companies in the world. So that tells you something about our customer base. We've got countless surveys showing that they really do 70% of our customer prospective and actual customers are have set net zero carbon targets, not necessarily science-based, but net zero targets. So it's that same thing about if you want to be a credible partner, like you were saying, you have to lead by example, and you have to walk the walk. So for us, it was really about that. And on driving action, again, as I was mentioning in my introduction, the process really allowed us to get buy-in from all levels of the business, and really be able to break down exactly what we needed to do to get to our short-term and long-term targets. And what I'll say is that the way that the building criteria is built, so looking at whole building emissions, so as many of us have to grapple with the challenges of landlord versus tenant responsibility, I feel like SBT it doesn't really matter. We all have to get there, and that's very clear that it's a whole building target. So for us, it really forced us to look really closely at where do we not have control? How do we address it? How do we move those areas back maybe within a bit more of our control, or find other ways to decarbonize those spaces where we have a bit less operational control. So I think that was really beneficial in kind of shining a light on those areas where previously we were like maybe not avoiding it a little, but like really there's nowhere to hide now. So I think it's very positive.
Great. Chris, how does having science-based targets drive action at Arup?
I mean, it's again a similar story. It's helping put a focus on on what we need to do. So Paula explained earlier about the gas replacement across the road, and that's very clearly aligned with a target which we've set, and everyone knows. And that starts right at the very top with sort of the executive teams, and then comes down so that there is so there's clarity around why we're doing what we're doing internally, and you can see that rolling up. But I think also for us going through the process, and it's great to hear about smooth processes, and I think ours was similarly smooth. It took a while to kind of get together the data and the plan, and then to submit and so forth. But going through that is very helpful for us in then working with our clients. And we're approaching the conversation slightly different to him, but we're sort of helping clients understand the options for them in setting science-based targets, whether it's an absolute reduction or intensity reduction. Then working through the process with them, showing that we've done that ourselves too, has been very helpful. So since the publication of the buildings criteria, although it doesn't apply to our business directly, many of our clients it does do, and working with businesses globally on what it would mean for them has been very useful for us to have had that lived experience.
It sounds like that engagement might be good for building relationships with your clients. Are you finding that?
Yeah. I've been asked to speak to various groups of interesting people about science-based targets, and that wouldn't have come about any other way. But it's been good to this was recently the European Logistics Forum. Are science-based targets for us? Okay, well let's talk it through and explain it. And so the fact that the buildings criteria has been published and is publicised, I think, has been really helpful to drive conversations. Yeah.
Okay, getting back to big picture again, and we're going to start with Roland and then go right down the panelists, so you guys will have a little time to think. What is the biggest barrier to decarbonization in the built environment, and how can it be overcome?
Yeah, that's a hard one if you have to choose one. I mean, it has to do with that fragmentation. But maybe let's focus a little bit on the question of the business case, which for many companies is still certainly the biggest challenge. And it's very interesting, Amanda, you quoted some research in your opening by JLL. And some of that research also shows how corporate commitments really drive at the moment that demand. And in some markets, the demand is today higher than the supply. So there is more companies looking for net zero aligned buildings across different asset classes. And the research is really quantitative. I don't know exactly the percentages, but it's in the 30-40% of shortfall of actually supply. So it opens a really interesting conversation. These are all now players that are looking to implement their science-based targets. And how does that drive the conversation? Because the challenge is still, well, how do we invest? How much capex is needed? Where do we get those paybacks? Those are still very real-world hurdles. But I think, as you said, it triggers collaboration inside the company. It triggers collaboration with tenants, etc. This really is a powerful driver for collaboration tout court in French. So everywhere, it really drives that need into the value chain. And as I said before, that's critical, because if we don't know where to go, then everybody just does their thing. But this really brings focus, and it helps bring that demand side. So yeah, it's overcoming that issue of the business case, and of course that's ultimately local. It's every situation is different. In some markets it's very difficult to get hold of renewable energy or access to a grid that's actually decarbonized. So also what can really the market deliver to achieve? So it's a very powerful driver to overcome that demand gap.
Okay, so what I heard is nailing the business case with access to capital being an important component of that, and collaborating, but maybe collaborating on messaging to policymakers that we need signals and
For sure.
increased demand,
Yeah.
increased supply
Yeah.
of energy to build.
Yeah, thanks for that. I forgot
Yeah.
to make a plug. We just launched on
I'm here for
Monday
you,
the
Roland.
business barometer on the breakthrough agenda, and that is exactly this type of signal to the policymakers. Breakthrough agenda is a government-led initiative with IEA, Mission Innovation, and others. And it looks at 7 sectors, among them buildings, but also steel, power, cement. So they're all connected. And indeed, there's a very powerful signal coming from the business community. First of all, as David said, we are all still in. We are not taking the eye off the ball. And we need you, policymakers, to help us with this. And we're quite specific in the buildings part, what is actually needed. Standard certification, demand creation, finance. These are the 3 fundamental issues where then policy can support us. So yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Giel, barriers.
Yeah,
and
that's of
solutions
course.
from the financial-
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's a key question, of course. I think we don't have an issue with financing new buildings. That's for sure. I think that's clear. New buildings are high standard, and it's easy to drive them in our portfolio, and of course lower our overall emission intensity by adding all types of new buildings with high standards. That's an easy one for us to drive change. But the complex part is, of course, the existing building stock. We all know that. So how do you renovate a building that has multiple tenants? And so I really like to focus also on the logistic issue, because how do you indeed an existing building with several tenants, how do you renovate and deeply renovate that building while moving those tenants out for a period of time? You lose also revenue over that period of time. I think thinking in an innovative way of that logistic issue is, I think, also key to find solutions for deep renovation of existing buildings.
Interesting. That sounds like a business opportunity for some entrepreneurial listener.
I would love to hear also from my colleague here how Workspace looks at that logistics issue.
Yeah, exactly. Collaboration opportunity. Chris, on to you.
Barriers.
Biggest barrier.
Yeah, sorry, one barrier. I think reflecting on some recent conversations, it's a technical solution. So yes, business case, but very practically, if we adopt this target, it's very ambitious. How are we going to achieve it? And so for us, it's being able to draw then on the body of work that we're doing as a firm, and supplementing that kind of experience of practically delivering solutions to our clients. So it's a persuading clients that with confidence you can set a target, and here are some solutions by which you can deliver it in practice, particularly around embodied carbon. And we've maybe talked more about that in the question time.
Fantastic, thanks. Ariane, I'm getting speed up signals, so very quickly, a big barrier and how we might resolve
Well, I think
it.
it's a good segue into your next question. Just embodied carbon. I'm speaking for workspace, but I think for most people anyway. Embodied carbon is the like a tough one, and how we can collaborate on adopting lower carbon materials. I think obviously the construction industry is a very risk-averse business. I'm not a civil engineer or anything. I'm not an Arup person, but it sounds like there's a lot of people who, well, you know, you start with a great client brief and then it sometimes get valued engineered along the way. And I think it wouldn't be so great if we could learn more from each other from various different countries. About what worked, like have more collaboration between like maybe insurers like that and risk teams and investors to kind of like get a little bit more comfortable with adopting new lower carbon practices. Because I mean, in my experience, we're still facing some resistance sometimes, but in our case we do renovate a lot, not do quite we don't do as much kind of like ground up new buildings, so from an embodied carbon perspective there's already huge savings, but I'm also conscious that not every business model is caters to that.
Yeah. Amanda, okay. So let's dig a little deeper on embodied carbon. So upfront embodied emissions. It's a critical part of the building's criteria. Some folks have been not that happy about that, but there it is. And it's a challenging one, right? Because supply chains are deeply dependent on high emitting sectors like steel and cement. Everyone, I think, has said steel, cement in their answers. It's right, you know, we can't avoid it. How are you including upfront embodied emissions in your own climate action plans and driving action on those? I'm going to start with Chris.
Yeah, so I think we would start with that question of what do you need to build? Are there other ways of achieving the same outcomes? So this is kind of past 2080 thinking. This do we need to approach it in the same way that we always have, but just try to decarbonize incrementally, or can we do something which is really quite considerably different but achieve the same kind of outcomes? Then I think there's that question about understanding how to use better what we already have, and this kind of comes back to the reuse question and embedding much more holistically circular economy into our design approaches as well. And then it's this kind of, okay, we've got something we need to build, we want to do it well, how do we do it the best we can? And I mentioned at the beginning a question about data, and I think this is, for us, we see a real opportunity there because you know, we have 1,000 building projects going on a year. What we need to be able to do is more effectively capture the good ideas that are being generated on those projects. And so, we just announced this week a collaboration with Autodesk to embed optioneering tools for whole life carbon, so we can actively measure and monitor embodied carbon as it's being designed through the design process. So we're kind of capturing, okay, we made this decision here and this was the benefit. So those lessons learned from across the firm and feeding those back into the beginning of the process, I think will help drive us really sort of significant and incremental changes.
Gil?
Yeah, I think as a bank we are in a unique position because we have so many clients in different sectors. So we see our role also really to connect those clients. And I like to give a key example, and I think it could also work for embodied carbon in buildings. So we have targets on steel and cement, and we financed a couple of years ago a hydrogen steel plant in Sweden. It's H2 green steel, it's now called Stegra. That steel is produced with hydrogen, so it's zero carbon, but it comes with a higher cost. So we worked as a bank with all other clients in our portfolio, and mainly also a lot of automotive clients, to get long-term agreements in place to buy that steel. And in the end, that made the business case feasible to build this factory because of these long-term procurement contracts. And I think connecting the dots between clients and especially to also have these materials flow to the building sector is a role we can play as a bank. This one.
Amanda, I have one question for anyone on the panel. Just you guys have all said in various ways, decarbonization backed by science-based targets is good for business. It gives you some competitive advantage. The clients are asking for it, and you've also said knowledge sharing, ideas, learning, collaboration. So to what extent? How do you balance that? You know, the competitive benefit of having new technology and learning how to do things better than others, and the need that the wider ecosystem has for collaboration and knowledge sharing. Anyone?
I think there's a couple of ways. There's the standards approach, and you bringing together experts from across the sector to generate a sector-led standard, I think is essential. So there's a contribution from business, but for a very clear objective. I think as that standard's implemented, we certainly want to be capturing data, but our intention is that we would be able to share that publicly and help that to drive then the next set of embodied carbon curves. Say so I think that kind of there's a point at which the data you hold is very important as a design firm, but actually we see the value in sharing when it's distilled and processed and understood well. We certainly see the value in sharing that.
Anyone else want to comment, or should we go to the? Yeah.
Maybe just a couple ideas on the embodied carbon side. I mean, Paula opened by she really enjoys her job, and I think there's nothing better than a really nice whole life carbon assessment, because that gives you all that data you need to make those decisions. So I think it should really start with that. And then, when we look at then the solutions for low carbon materials, you mentioned this steel plant, but also the cement sector. There is more and more CCS plants now coming on stream. So the solutions are starting to be available. You just need to require them, and that's why you need to do your whole life carbon assessment. But then there is maybe still a challenge with the certain market-based, approaches. If you all of a sudden deliver all your net zero cement into one market, it will not be valorized. You just sell it as a commodity. So it's very controversial at the moment, but there are people who want to pay for that. They call this the book and claim, an idea. Now, I don't know how SBTi would look at this, or because ultimately you're trying to drive a private sector response. Your primary audience is business. So it has to be very credible, very transparent, but there is maybe a way to really drive that, because you don't ship cement around the world. You sell it into your market, and you might not get that premium for your higher investment. So just some ideas. And another idea, it's not from me, it's from somebody who really understands this. It's a little tweak to the GHG protocol. And I want to mention it here because I think the more people think about it, the more maybe it's something that could happen. Imagine if, scope 1, 2, 3 is confusing to everybody. A building ultimately serves a purpose of people occupying it. What if all that embodied carbon and whole life carbon all of a sudden sits on the book of the tenant? And you amortize that over a few years, 25 years or so, over a hold period. This changes the whole conversation. So you all of a sudden, it changes accountability, so very uncomfortable. But we're already starting. Many companies are starting, well, what is my role in helping my tenant or others? So it changes the accountability of how do you actually deal with that carbon that all of a sudden sits on your book. The idea comes from an investor, because of course that is your lens that you're taking on. So yeah, I couldn't resist to just bring it up as an idea, because the more people I think about it, the more it might come to fruit. So I stop here.
Hilar, do you have something pressing, or can we go to the? No? Okay. Go
I'm
ahead,
actually
Amanda.
just going to say I'm aware that there are a lot of questions, and as I predicted before we started, very many of those are probably tailored towards me and my colleagues rather than our amazing panelists. So please do grab me or my colleagues, and we'll spend time to help answer those specific ones, or have a look online. So I think for the interest of time, let's have a chance to chat afterwards if you want to wrap up or grab some of the last thoughts from the panelists, Tracy. But I am not dismissing any of the questions at all. They're just probably better for our team than our brilliant panelists. So thank you.
Amanda, how long do we have? 5 minutes. Okay, so I want to just build on the collaboration point and ask for ideas about how the building sector can work more collaboratively together to drive towards decarbonization. Who wants to start? Ariane.
I think my point is less about like maybe the building sector like together, but more about, and I know it doesn't relate necessarily directly to the building criteria, but kind of collaborating with the supply chain in general, whether it's your construction material or other, because, you know, the purchase goods and services, as it's called in the GHG protocol, is often quite like a huge part of our company's carbon footprint, as it is for others. And what we found for the process of science-based targets is we need to tackle that now as well, although we have much less control. And I think it's kind of showing that as a maybe further ahead on the curve of carbon literacy and decarbonization, I think for workspace, it's also our responsibility to kind of like share that knowledge and drive action from our suppliers who are, the big ones already have targets, but the smaller ones that the smaller contractors that we work very closely with. So I think there's this whole kind of like collaboration and kind of leading the way. And at the end of the day, they see the benefit because, as we always find, a business that has a strong carbon management strategy is often a well-operated business. These often go hand in hand because it highlights certain areas that can be optimized. So that's why I'd say on the collaboration, kind of like engaging with our supply chain to help them decarbonize is also really important, whether it's on construction materials or other services. So that's, yeah.
I mean, I've already started to talk a little bit about data and data sharing. I mean, around that data standards, I think is important so that we know what we're sharing and we can collaborate. Not so much in this case, perhaps with the supply chain, but amongst peers. So we sort of certainly see the success in things like such as the UK net zero carbon building standard, which was a huge sort of peer industry-wide effort to try and understand what does this mean in practice. You're taking SBTi, sort of like the global pathways, but what does it mean by sector in this country, and then you're taking the lead on that from an industry perspective. So I think that kind of that the peer collaboration is important too. That we should try and do that. And so in order to do that, one of the enabling conditions will be having kind of the data sharing standards that allow us to build that out together.
Gil, any thoughts on collaboration? What would drive collaboration?
Yeah, so at ING we applied a transmission model, we call it, where that looks really at who are the key players in the system to drive change, and building partnerships with them is key to us. Yeah, so we started to do that, and I think that's really key to make those connections with the key players and build platforms and collaboration together to drive change. So, and that is region specific, of course, and that makes it also a big challenge to do that in the various countries where we're active. But I think that's the way to go to really start these partnerships with the network we have as a bank.
Roland, any final thoughts?
I think this is really excellent, by the way. It really needs the banks to be involved and the financial institutions. But yeah, we are all about collaboration. That is really the unique role WBCSD plays at the global level. And I guess our theory of change is in somewhat, there's a lot of good things happening everywhere, but we need to much more learn from these good things because maybe they can be built on or inspire other things. You can never copy paste, but really, and I think also this work and the SBTi now available for buildings, it just once more helps elevate the visibility of this sector. It used to be seen as a huge problem. but now everybody is actually looking at the solution. So we can start saying, well, look, the solutions are there, but they can only happen through collaboration. So please join us in our market transformation work. That's really what we're trying to drive. And yeah, thank you again for organizing this.
Thanks so much for all of my panelists for being here. I'm going to just close with what I heard. And what I heard from our panelists that others, many of you have already said science-based targets, what we need to see from you. So what I heard was show leadership and elevate the vision for a net zero future and the role of the buildings environment. Use your influence, right? In many different, in completely different businesses, you all talked about the influence you have with your suppliers, with your customers, with the wider ecosystem. Know what your influence is and use it. Build partnerships. Build partnerships to understand what others are doing, to learn from them, share what you're learning, and learn from others. I heard Chris say in different words, think ahead. Think about what buildings you're going to need in the future, where you can get them, if you can reuse, embed circularity in your thinking, in your planning, in your design. We heard about some specific solutions, so tweaks to the GHGP, that's fantastic. Working on a data standard. We heard about really interesting ways that the setting science-based targets is helping different businesses drive action. And I want to close with the best quote of the panel. There's nothing better than a nice whole life carbon assessment from Roland. Thank you very much, panelists. Thanks so much. And thanks to Arup for hosting.